Hello. Today, what we're going to do is I'm going to share something with you. I love the field of history. I love the study history. Everything has history. A car has history. You have history. Everything has history. Every time I look around, I'm intrigued because it's not a building I can look at. You can look at an oak tree and it has history. There's history all around us. Now, today's thesis of this is that history has lessons. History has lessons. Lessons beyond a textbook. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to where I fell in love with history. I fell in love with history on a 5x7 porch in Gulfport, Mississippi. And I'm going to greet you like my grandmother greeted folks when they came to her porch. Welcome, 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 welcome to this space. Now, on that porch served as a kitchen because we used to clean greens, shell peas, eat watermelon, enjoy our good old sugar cane. It served as a community center because everybody's children seemed like they were always there. It served as a town hall, but everybody there who wanted to share politics about things. And people would come by and they'll say, did you know, did you see? It served as church because some people got there and they sung songs and they talked about folks, as what happened at the services. It was everything to me. And I used to sit there and I used to sit and observe. And folks came through with some of the best stories. And I listened and I was intrigued by them. It was wonderful stories. And as the more and more the stories were told, the more and more I began to say, wow, this is what it's all about. This connectedness through the stories, the narratives. So what happens is, one time we went to my great auntie's house. She had a porch. And again, my whole life, the starting point for me in history is that porch. And so what happens is so I'm sitting on the porch one day, phone call ring, 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 ring. And so what happens is I hear my great aunt tell my grandmother, Mert, so-and-so Doolittle is coming by. And my eyes widen. Because on that porch, I heard about the Doolittles. The Doolittles own my family. They didn't sick dogs, they sick Doolittles. They didn't say everything that was bad was a Doolittle. And so here I am saying, that Doolittle's coming over here. I'm a child on the porch swinging, right? And that Doolittle's coming, oh yeah, let her come on by here. Yeah. So then next thing you know, a car drives up and she gets out the car and looking at it. And I said, is that a Doolittle? Because I thought that all Doolittles were big and powerful, the way that the stories were told. And guess what? I saw this feeble-looking woman getting out the car. And then I saw my grandmother and my great aunt go over there, and they were helping her. And she got out the car, and then she comes into the house. She passes me up on the porch. My grandmother, them just laughing and smiling. And then next thing you know, they said, you want some 7-Up cake? I'm like, 7-Up cake? That's like the big cake in my family. That's like a pound cake with some 7-Up in it. And so what happens is I'm like, what? And then they gave her some coffee, and I was like, what's going on? I really thought we were going to get this Doolittle. And so what happens is I'm still swinging on the porch, swinging. So they laughing, ha, ha, ha. So about after a while, let's say about an hour or so, in child's mind, it was for me hours. But what happens is the car comes back up. My grandmother and her sister help her back out to the car. She gets in, they wave. I'm just like puzzled. And so I told my grandmother and my great aunt, I couldn't hold it. I bust in the living room and kitchen were like connected. And I said, and I called my grandmother Mama. I said, Mama, why were y'all nice to that Doolittle? And my great aunt looked at me and she looked at her sister and they both fell out laughing. And they said, girl, we just wanted to let her know she didn't break us. That was to learning how to interpret stories. I was a child looking at this history that I had already heard about, and then I see this story. And here are these women who are marginalized, have been taken advantage of, invisible in many narratives. And they were saying they weren't broken. And when you look at another story that's very similar to that, one of the things that when I was at my undergraduate, they had us to write an essay. They said, if your shoes could talk, what would they say? And I say that my shoes would say that they enjoy porches and being under the tables at libraries. At the library, I read about this guy by the name of David Walker. At another porch, I learned about the story of Nat Turner. And then at another porch down the street from my grandmother's house, I learned about Frederick Douglass. And what happens is I saw them as a triumvirate because the years that I was told, we have David Walker would publish David Walker Appeal in 1829. And then Nat Turner would have a rebellion in August of 1831. And then Frederick Douglass would actually have the fight of his life at the age of 16. He would fight a person who was told, preserve his body, break his spirit. He was beaten repeatedly for 6 months. And then finally, he had enough. And he decided that if I'm going to die this day, I'm going to die this day. And so when my head, I saw a triumvirate. So when I was looking at the narratives, and I was like, this is wonderful. So when I'm sitting in the classroom, right, and teachers would say, look at, Nat Turner failed. And I'm looking and I'm like, no, he didn't. Not in my narrative. I can't see. Why do you say he failed? Well, because they end up capturing him and he ended up getting hanged. But didn't you say the slave laws emerged from that? Well, yeah. Don't we still know his name? Yeah, but. And then they told me with another person, it was a guy by the name of John Brown, and this was the big one. This was when I was in 11th grade, and the teacher told us that John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry was a failure. And I'm looking and I'm like, a failure? John Brown, before he died, said in order to get rid of slavery, he was convinced that this land had to be purged with blood. What was that American Civil War? And the teacher, no, you don't understand. He got captured in here. No, but John Brown started a conversation that helped to lead to the war. So what you're calling failure, I see failure as a portal to triumph. And you can marginalize people when you're looking only at the failure in the short term and not looking at it in the long term. So Frederick Douglass would say in his narrative, chapter 10, wonderful is his fight with Edward Kofi, and he says, I would remain a slave in form for 4 more years, but I was free that day. And so when you look at the narrative with Frederick Douglass, when he had this fight, he was good and whipped, and he was still a slave, but no, something happened that day. So when we look at American history, we're looking at these stories that people can say, well, Marcus Garvey failed because the Black Star Line didn't work out. Well, let's see. Didn't he end up mobilizing people and having the largest meeting at the time at Madison Square Garden? Yeah, but no. You can't marginalize people and look at a temporary, what looks like failure, and then say that's the narrative. The reason I call those three the triumvirate is because when you look at what happened in 1829 with David Walker's appeal, in which he urged African Americans to love themselves and to fight for themselves. David Walker's appeal would help to lead, so you're probably more familiar with a man by the name of William Lloyd Garrison. He would have, he's an abolitionist. He would have a magazine called The Liberator. What most people in American history don't tell you is that The Liberator was actually sustained by African American dollars, because the narrative would tell you that African Americans were so poor that, hey, look, they were just trying to make it. But here's The Liberator, the head abolitionist newspaper at the time, sustained by black dollars. And then you have Nat Turner, who's there. David Walker is in Boston. Nat Turner is in Virginia, Southampton, Virginia. And here he is leading this rebellion. And then you have Frederick Douglass, who refused to be broken. So when you look at the narrative, when you take these three stories apart, oh, well, they didn't really end up in much success. But when you look at them together, you see an agency. You do see a triumph of people who are giving a level of resistance to a narrative that was saying that they were content with their lot. So when we look at this piece, another story that my grandmother told me on that porch in Gulfport, Mississippi, somebody came by and they started talking and they mentioned someone by the name of Emmett Till. And I said, you should have seen the faces. Everybody's face turned up, Lord have mercies came out. And so when people said, Lord have mercy, uh-oh. And so I said, what's going on? I said, Mama, Emmett Till, he's some kin to us. They lynched him. First time I would ever hear that word. And I could tell by her facial expression. I said, is that something bad? Yeah, his mama only knew him by the ring on his hand. Mama, is he still living? No, he's dead. Mama, why y'all talking about a dead boy? We just don't want folks to forget the craziness of some folks. That was on that porch, and that's how I learned to look at American history. So later on, when I would go on and I would do an undergraduate paper on Emmett Till, would later turn into a PhD, that 5x7 porch, my introduction to American history, and the learning and looking at the interpretations of how marginalized women said they didn't want to be broken. And I'm reading down the street, Miss Coffee is introducing me to Frederick Douglass, and he's having a fight. And I'm sitting here wondering as an 11-year-old child, wow, this is what happened? So here's that story. The story of history is that if you're looking at something and you only see the temporary failure, you don't see it as a portal to triumph. And so, history is not just one books and stories of when we sort of look at stories like, again, like the ones that I just mentioned. There's another history. And that history is you have the secular and then you have the sacred. On that porch, I told you we used to go to church. And so one day, my grandmother told me I had to go to Bible study from the lady down the street. I told my grandmama. She said, Tonya, come back home as soon as it's over. I said, Mama, of course I'll come home. But then guess what happened? I saw a kickball game, and I wanted to go play kickball. Now, my grandmother told me not to come straight home. She said, Tonya, come straight home, but, well, I want to play kickball. So what happens is I went over there and I played. Well, what happened was they didn't even let me into the game. And so I went over there to play kickball, and they wouldn't let me into the game. And so I was a little late getting home. And, of course, I decided that I was going to sneak in my grandmother's sycamore tree, and I was going to act like I was there the whole time. And so she basically tells me, she says, after a while, she comes out, and she sees me. She said, Tonya, didn't I tell you to come home? And I just started bawling. I started crying. I mean, I was like really in tears. And she said, I haven't even whipped you yet. And I was like, no, Mama, I'm going to catch a whipping for nothing. What you mean nothing? When you supposed to come on? No, they didn't even let me in the game. And then she said, wait now, Tonya. So you went up in there and it was a failed attempt, right? I said, yes, ma'am, they didn't even let me in the game. She said, well, you can't become what you think your failure is. And she said, let me tell you about that. I told you we went to church. So we're out there by the sycamore tree, and she said, well, I know you know Jesus. And I said, yes, ma'am, the teacher. And she said, well, you know he had 12 disciples. I said, yes, ma'am. And she said there was 2. One was Judas, and then one was Peter. She said, now, both of them were with Jesus all the time. Yes, ma'am. One of them, he said, you're going to betray me before 12 o'clock. No, I won't. Yes, you will. No, I won't. Yes, you will. He betrayed him. The other, with a kiss and 30 pieces of silver, betrayed him. Yes, ma'am. See, Tonya, both of them betrayed him and failed. They failed him. When they betrayed him, they failed him. One of them was so overcome with their grief, he took his life. The other one went and he saw this thing through, and he helped to build the Christian church. How you choose to handle something in failure makes or break you. So I'm like, I got it. Next, okay, I got it. I still wish they would have let me play kickball, though. And I tell that story because between hearing my grandmother frame a sacred text and then knowing the secular stories that I would come and I would know, I started to see history and looking at how history and failure, when people only look at a short term of an individual, they can see a 12-year-old boy who's told that he can't be a lawyer, so he goes and he sells drugs. He enters a jail as Detroit Red. He's basically listed as a failure. But when he comes out of that thing, he's Malcolm X. When you're looking at a story, a woman by the name of Ida B. Wells, they told Ida B. Wells, you're lynching. She ended up having this anti-lynching campaign because black men and women were being lynched regularly. And she said, she started this campaign and people were saying, it's not successful because you didn't stop lynching. No, she ended up introducing a discourse that made lynching a subject matter, that people could not say anymore, that's just people exacting justice. No, it was illegal to do, and she started a discourse. That discourse would end up turning into the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and their initial charge was to end lynching. So when you look at a person in a snapshot, and you only see one side of their story, then you're like, okay, that person failed. But when you look at the collective, it could be the portal to triumph. I told you that history is full of lessons. And that is the lesson I leave you today. Thank you.